Unknown to many, Southeast Asia also once had its very own, very similar international organization that, was also formed for the very same reason. So what exactly is SEATO? And whatever happened to it? Mabuhay! Earn Kapampangan, luwid kayo, and in Thai, sawadee krap! Welcome back to another history video. It is me, Kirby Araullo, your friendly Pinoy historian. And if you are new to my channel, in this channel, I make videos about our people's history, culture, and everything in between, from the Philippines and across Southeast Asia. So if you like learning about any of those things, don't forget to like, share this video, comment down below, and please subscribe. And in today's video, we will be looking into the history of SEATO, learning a little bit more about the history of the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, aka SEATO. But before we begin, here are a few reminders. Today's video is just a brief introduction into this topic, so check out the links below for a list of resources and recommended readings. And if you would like to support my channel and my research, please be my patron on Patreon or be a member of my YouTube channel or get copies of any of my books, coloring books, and ebooks, or any of the merch linked down below. Maraming salamat po! So recently, with the war raging in Ukraine, having an enormous impact in our present-day geopolitics and global economies, NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is once again dominating the headlines in the world news. But unknown to many, Southeast Asia also once had its very own, very similar international organization that, was also formed for the very same reason. So what exactly is SEATO? And whatever happened to it? Let's begin with some historical context. The 1950s and the 1960s was a period when the Cold War between the United States and its allies against the Soviet Union and their allies was at its most intense. These were the years of the Korean War, the establishment of the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then of course in Southeast Asia, the Vietnam War. And the two main theaters of this rivalry were in Europe and what was then often referred to as the Far East, aka East Asia and Southeast Asia, with a particular focus on Southeast Asia from the mid-1950s onwards. And this was symbolized in the creation of military alliances in these regions. In Europe, the Warsaw Pact of the Soviets went up against the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, as we more commonly know it today. But there were also alliances in the Far East. The Soviets were allied in one form or another with North Korea, the People's Republic of China, and North Vietnam, while the US, on the other hand, built the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and today we will explore its history and legacy. The Southeast Asia Treaty Organization emerged out of the developments in the early to mid-1950s in Southeast Asia. In the aftermath of the Second World War, France found it increasingly difficult to maintain control over its considerable colonial possessions in what was then known as Indochina, an area which covered the region approximating to what are now the countries of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. A war of independence broke out in Vietnam, and the revolution there began receiving aid from the Soviet Union, while many resistance movements and revolutions against colonial rule across the region also began to drift towards the Marxist-Leninist ideologies during the Cold War. As a response from the Americans, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO, was established as a way of bolstering Western control and influence in the region, and to stop Southeast Asia from falling entirely into the Soviet camp in the same way Eastern Europe had the previous decade in the mid-1940s. So under the administration of US President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was determined to contain the spread of communism and had even considered the use of nuclear weapons in the Korean War, the United States became more interventionist in Southeast Asia, while at the same time the French disentangled themselves from Indochina. And one of the major prongs of this policy was the establishment of SEATO as a Southeast Asian equivalent of NATO. This came into formal existence in 1954 after an agreement was signed between several nations in the Philippine capital of Manila. Hence, it is now known as the Manila Pact of 1954. But perhaps one of the most curious aspects of SEATO during its near quarter of a century of existence was that its membership did not actually include many independent Southeast Asian nations. So if you look at it, there were 8 full members of the organization, namely the United States, Britain, France, Australia, New Zealand, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Thailand, most of which we would hardly associate with Southeast Asia today. However, this is not as out of place as it might seem. I mean, for example, Britain and France both had historic ties to Southeast Asia and a continuing direct presence in the region. For instance, the British controlled Hong Kong and Singapore when the alliance was first established, while on the other hand, Australia administered Papua New Guinea during this period, and Pakistan still included East Pakistan, which would not become the independent nation of Bangladesh until 1971. So each of these commitments gave these nations a physical presence in the region we now call Southeast Asia. Additionally, along with these 8 full members of SEATO, the states of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, which had only just achieved independence from France when SEATO was established, became protocol states or affiliate members. These affiliate members were blocked from full membership under the terms of the Geneva Agreement, an international conference which brought the end to the First Indochina War in 1954. It is also worth noting that other Southeast Asian nations, such as Indonesia, declined to join. Now, how does it compare to NATO? I mean, NATO is still around, so whatever happened to SEATO? Where did it go? So from the very beginning, from its inception, the goal of the organization, the goal of SEATO, was to prevent the further spread of communism in Southeast Asia. And as such, it was primarily a military alliance, and accordingly, military drills were held during its just over 20 years of existence. However, because it was realized that the fight against the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China involved more than a mere military conflict, the organization also involved efforts to improve the economic situation in Southeast Asia as a means of winning over support to the capitalist camp in countries like Thailand, the Philippines, Laos, and Cambodia. And again, this mirrored what was happening in Europe, where Greece and Turkey had received extensive financial aid from the United States through the Marshall Plan in the aftermath of the Second World War. And this was done as a means of preventing these 2 vital nations in the Eastern Mediterranean from falling under Moscow's control. But unlike NATO, SEATO was highly unsuccessful. It lasted for just over 20 years, from its inception in the mid-1950s down to 1977. And during its existence, SEATO was headquartered in Bangkok, Thailand. And it was presided over by a series of Secretary Generals who hailed from either the Philippines, Thailand, or Australia. And throughout its existence, the role of SEATO in Southeast Asia was compromised by America's escalating involvement in Vietnam and the growing condemnation of the Vietnam War as the 1960s went on. In addition, there was also a lack of agreement between the members of SEATO, the members of the alliance, about using military force in the region. For example, when the United States wished to intervene in Laos in the early 1960s, Britain and France vetoed the efforts to use the organization to this end. And then in 1972, Pakistan withdrew from the alliance when what is now Bangladesh became independent. Finally, the end of the Vietnam War in 1975 and the rise of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia seemed to be an indication of the end of the American involvement in what was then known as Indochina. And thus, the alliance lost its raison d'etre, or in English, its justification for existence. And it was also in 1975 that Australian involvement in Papua New Guinea ended when the island nation achieved its independence. Consequently, 2 years later, SEATO came to an end on the 30th of June 1977, when the administration of then US President Jimmy Carter officially dissolved it. Okay, so was SEATO an epic fail? Let's find out. The legacy of SEATO is not just, somewhat mixed, but also very complicated. As a military alliance, it was a complete failure and achieved nothing tangible. However, the funding which it made available to improve social and economic conditions of several states across Southeast Asia was significantly more successful. For instance, it was SEATO funding which allowed for the establishment of the SEATO Graduate School of Engineering in Thailand, the forerunner of today's Asian Institute of Technology. And perhaps more significantly, SEATO funding was also responsible for the foundation of the Cholera Research Laboratory in Bangkok, Thailand in 1959, along with a similar center in Dhaka, the capital of what is now Bangladesh. These institutes have been responsible over the last 60 plus years for a major intervention in Southeast Asia to prevent cholera outbreaks. And thus, while the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO, was a complete failure as a military alliance, its legacy in the war against cholera was more profound. But perhaps even more significant, critics of SEATO also point out its contradiction as just another imperialist organization that was created for the benefit of the former colonial powers in the region, particularly the United States. For example, critics in the Philippines point towards the fact that such treaties actually dragged the Filipino people into getting involved in the bloodshed in the wars of aggression against the sovereignty of other people. And another criticism was that, the economic aid received from the United States always came with significant strings attached. They also argued that SEATO is just another excuse for imperialist powers to intervene in local affairs, and thus infringe on the sovereignty and the freedom of the Filipino people. It is also worth noting that, in a way, for better or for worse, the failures of SEATO paved the way for the creation of ASA, or the Association of Southeast Asia, by Thailand, the Philippines, and the Federation of Malaya in 1961. And then, of course, eventually, the establishment of the greater, more inclusive, and more cohesive Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, in 1967. And for those who may not know, ASEAN is a political and economic union of the modern-day nation-states of Southeast Asia. But we can talk more about ASEAN in a future video, so let me know in the comments below if that is something that you would like to see here on my channel. And that is it for me today, so let me know what you think about today's topic in the comments below. Like, for example, what do you think would have happened if SEATO still exists? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you like this video and learn a thing or two, don't forget to like, share this video, comment down below, and please subscribe. But of course, before we go, today's shoutout goes to Chet from Thailand, Andang from Vietnam, CJ from the Philippines, Rahman Setiadi from Indonesia, and special thank you and special shoutout to my patron Richie. Syempre, this video will not be possible without the love and the support of all my patrons and my subscribers throughout these years. Kaya naman, maraming salamat po. Daghang salamat, dakalpong salamat, magsukol tuod kay mo, o in bahasa Melayu, terima kasih. And in Thai, kapun krap. See you next time, or in Tagalog kita-kits, and in Kapampangan, Mikitiks, and in Thai, Jargan May, and in Bahasa Melayu, Jumpa lagi.